evening, everybody. Sorry, slightly fumbly start there. I just had a couple of glitches before we started and I wasn't able to turn on my little video at the right time. So welcome to another one of our weekly webinars. Tonight we have Kristian Dowling with us, who's a highly experienced, celebrity, documentary, travel, you name it, commercial photographer of many years experience. Some of you, and I know some of you have been to some of his workshops here in Australia, and so we've got him along this evening just to talk about his career and the images he shoots. And there's a lot of stuff that he'll show you which I'm pretty sure you won't have seen before, because there's a really great breadth to his work which is quite impressive. So really, rather than me tell you about him, I'm going to get Kristian to join us. So Kristian should be there. You're going to turn on your video and your sound and join us. Here he comes. Hey Kristian, how are you?
Good, Nick. Thanks. How are you?
Good. Yeah, you're good. You're coming through well. Thanks very much. Whereabouts are you? In Melbourne at the moment?
I'm in Melbourne right now, in lockdown. I'm glad not to be wearing my mask right now. So
yeah, I think you're probably safe in your little room there, like I am too. So, what have you been doing with all of this hocus pocus at the moment? Are you working much, or are you just working on?
I'm planning a bit of a YouTube future at the moment, as well as redoing my commercial business approach, and just sort of trying to make the most of this time, that's, I guess, downtime like everybody else, and doing what I can to remain positive.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat, to be honest. I mean, I'm up in Queensland, so it's not so bad here, but
you're lucky.
Anything can change, I think. And
that's right.
Watch the news every day. Anyway, enough of the doom and gloom. We're here to talk about photography. So maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit for those people who are watching who haven't seen your work before. Give us a little bit of a background of how you started and what got you into photography in the first place.
Sure. I started, I guess my passion came from my father, and he had a Nikon F3 many years ago, and I started working in a camera store in Melbourne when I was 15. It was called Genius Camera and Video. So I'm not particularly sure if some of you out there might remember that store, but that's where it all began. And I started roaming the streets of Melbourne. That was quite around 28 years ago, and I found my way to Leica through just the fact that at that time autofocus was not very good. So I needed to focus on trying to find a camera that could manually focus. But then I also found SLR as a bit of a challenge, because I wasn't sure if it was in focus, out of focus. Made my way to the M6 rangefinder just before I turned 16. Wow. And I saved up for that for nearly a year. And I was a very lucky 15-year-old running around the streets with an M6.
Wow. That is amazing, actually. So you've actually been a Leica user for really quite a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, quite a while. I remember back the first there was a thing called the Leica Lug, as well as photo.net was one of the first, if not the first, Leica forum on the net. So I've been participating and engaging with fellow Leica photographers ever since then, and it's carried over through my career and through to my previous position in Thailand, working as the manager of Leica Academy there, and then throughout my workshops that I've been doing over the last 12 years.
I think the workshop that you're most known for is the low light workshop, which we'll talk about a bit towards the end of this, because we've got that coming up, and I'll tell our viewers a little bit more about that at the end. So what I think probably the best thing to do is for you to actually jump into your presentation and just show us, was it Jesse Marlowe's book, Don't Tell Them, Show Them. So
don't tell them, just show them, something like that. Yeah. Great book, by the way, for those that don't know.
It's really
funny enough. Jesse Marlowe actually was the guy that got me my first sort of gig in photography.
Really?
Yeah, he gave me my first break. So forever grateful for that. Wow. Yeah, but I guess we can get into the presentation. And
yes, so if you want to share your presentation, I've had a quick look through this afternoon, and there's some really cool stuff in there. So I'm just going to take a backward step here, Kristian, and let you do this, but I may interrupt you occasionally, because please, everybody, feel free to ask questions. And if you could use the Q&A feature, it's just easier for me to track the questions. The chat is really just for the more casual stuff. I mean, if a question comes up in the chat, I'll still see it, but the Q&A is really the best one. And then when a question comes up which seems sort of appropriate to what Kristian's talking about, and I can interrupt the flow politely, I'll do my best to interject. And then at the end, I'll try and whiz back through the questions and make sure we've done them all. Can't guarantee that we won't miss some. I know I always say this, but sometimes we get so many questions we simply can't get through all of them. So we'll do our best. Anyway, Kristian, over to you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I've got to hit share. Sorry.
That's the one. There we go. All
there
good.
we go, everyone.
All right.
Okay.
Not a problem.
So I'm going to focus my story on going to Hollywood and back, because basically my career as a professional photographer was sort of built around entertainment and Hollywood. But let me take you through to my humble beginnings. And I'm going to start with documentary. As I said, I started when I was 15 years old on the streets of Melbourne. And this was my very first image that I created that I felt was the most successful, where I actually combined the use of manual exposure, which I only shoot manual exposure. There's not any circumstance where I will actually not shoot manual. And I found that that's been a very big key to my success. And it started on the streets here, and it was my most successful picture probably of sort of my younger generation, where younger years, where I'd combined, was my first combination of, I guess, light, shadow, precise exposure, action with, you know, clever composition, I guess you could say at the time. And I still look back at this and I'm really, really happy with this picture. And that was taken on the M6. You know, I'll just go through the first lot of images fairly quickly, guys. And this is back in Bangkok. Actually, so this is in Hua Hin in Thailand. And I was sort of walking by with the, I'm pretty sure this was the M9, I believe. And that was on the 28 Summicron. And there was a little boy just playing in the box. And, you know, I think for me, the light was what attracted me initially. But, you know, sort of looking at the image, and I saw this little boy just sort of sitting in the box, and then he's sort of, the moment, I guess the key defining moment here was when he sort of put his hand up as sort of a moment of shyness, and, you know, sort of still peeping out because he was quite interested to see why we were shooting him sitting in a box. I guess to, you know, these sorts of kids, they have no idea what I'm thinking, but, you know, I'm thinking of creating something artistic and something interesting. And the light that was sort of like coming through the roof was just beautiful. So love this picture.
Question for you, interrupting there. Jeremy Brown would like to know, this is a really good question, you're going to like this. Okay. What is the one thing you know now about photography that you wish you knew back when you created your early images?
Ooh, I guess that, well, that's a really good question. Thanks, Jeremy. Probably about social media and the impact that social media would actually have. It probably not so much about photography. I always felt I had a very strong keenness to learn and keep learning, and I just wanted to get better and better. But I never took social media so seriously until it was kind of too late. And you know, it became this really big phenomenon that you need as a platform to promote yourself. And I remember I was in Hollywood, and at that time, you know, Instagram was starting to become so, you know, quite big. And I remember people telling me like, "Oh, you should get on there. You should get on there." And I'm like, "No, that's for the Kardashians and, you know, hipsters." And you know, sort of years later, I'm like, "Oh, wow, okay, maybe it would have been a good idea to do that." So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. But there's probably a lot more things which I might think of as we go.
Okay.
So moving on, this was in New York during Fashion Week. Everything was about fashion. And I, of course, I wanted to hit the streets of New York, and I wanted to sort of capture something about Fashion Week from a different perspective. And this was a reflection of you'll see like sort of an advertisement to my right. And all I had to do was wait for the right car to pass by, and then just sort of line up the composition very carefully. And, you know, compositions, to me, it's kind of like a puzzle of putting together just a combination of timing, placement, and, framing. Framing composition is different. Framing is an element of composition. And this is one of those images where, I had to really think quickly because this person had no idea I was taking her picture.
Mm.
And, the one thing that sort of caught my eye was obviously that outline of what we call rim lighting that was coming from the sun. And then just, I guess you could say, underexposing the image. I don't use terms of under and overexposure too often because I don't believe that there's such a thing as a correct exposure. For example, when I shoot, I don't actually look at the exposure meter. I shoot in manual, and I guess and I feel the light, and then I basically take a test shot, and then from there, I'll get what I call the baseline exposure, and I know whether I need to go up 2 stops, down 1 stop, and so for me, this was the correct exposure. But for a lot of people, they would say that it's severely underexposed. So.
Question, Kristian. The one's
Yes.
popped up, and I agree with everything you just said. That's well put as well. Ian Picken would like to know, noting your preference for manual, I have a Q2 and I like the manual settings. Can you give some advice on some of the settings that would be helpful? ISO, f-stop, and speed. Thanks. Great presentation, etc. So it's a little bit difficult to answer, but because it obviously depends. But maybe have a crack at that.
It's a really good question because, and I'll skip to this next picture as we go. It's a question I get asked a lot, and I think what it does, it comes from a background of wanting to know little tips and tricks to get around tricky situations, and the answer is that there's actually no actual manual settings that I could recommend. A lot of people try and memorize certain scenarios and remember the settings that they use in certain scenarios. And I'm not saying that's the wrong approach. It's understandable. But as you become more experienced with photography, you learn that every image is unique to itself. And every situation presents a new set of challenges. It might be the same or very similar to something you've experienced before. But I think when you shoot enough, especially in manual, what happens is that over time you memorize instinctively these settings. For example, if I was to ask photographers out there, what's more important, aperture or shutter? Or what do you first think about when you take a picture? Most people would say aperture. I would say maybe you're wrong. Because I've failed many, many times. And the number one technical mistake made by photographers is that they actually have a shutter speed that is too slow. And I've shot a lot of events over the years, and I have one chance to get an image, whether it be sporting events or news events. And shutter speed was always the thing that I would make those mistakes with, because I'm wanting to keep the ISO low. Because I'm thinking about image quality. But what's more important than image quality is picture quality, the overall picture. So you're better off having a faster shutter speed, freeze your action, as long as you're not wanting to do a creative blur, freeze your action. Then I think of my aperture next in terms of what depth of field I want. And then the ISO is what marries those two together to give me the exposure that I'm looking for.
Brilliant. That's well put. Absolutely.
It needs to be demonstrated, which I would do at a workshop.
Yeah.
But certainly that's the baseline of what we're talking about.
Very well put. And that leads me to another question, which is, do you use the histogram very much?
No, never.
Okay.
I've learned to trust the LCD on the back of the camera. And what I do is I match it up with the same image to the monitor that I'm working with, whether it be a MacBook Pro or my desktop. And that way I can trust the LCD and what it's showing me. I understand there are people that will look at the histogram, and it certainly has a place in photography. But I find that I want to look at my camera as little as possible when I'm shooting. And the histogram is just something else to look for. And this picture was taken in Bangkok, by the way, with the 28 Summicron, and yeah, I love this photo. And I think I won't talk too much about these images unless people necessarily have questions, but I think that I've made a lot of mistakes over the years, and a lot of them have to do with shutter. So if I could implore any sort of advice to people, it's really think about shutter first before you take a picture. And I tend to think of a camera too as a light box. If I started off with an M6, everything's completely manual. There's no aperture or shutter priority. So I think the camera, it lets in light. I control how much light. I control how long that light hits the sensor or the film. And all I've got to think about is composition from there onwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to be thinking about focus modes too much. I don't want to think about histograms and even color at some point. And going off this image here, a lot of the images that you see that I've actually converted to black and white were shot in black and white, meaning, and I know that this is something that you do as well, Nick, which is actually shooting in black and white on the camera with a raw, obviously a raw file. And what that does is it puts my frame in a composition focused state of mind where I'm not being distracted by color. And to me, that's really important. This was taken actually with the Q2 recently when I did this was a scouting exercise I was doing for a workshop in Bangkok. And I got great access to the Muay Thai kickboxing. And this is actually using a little bit of a crop. This is probably around a 50 mil crop on the Q2. Amazing camera. I won't probably talk too much about cameras unless I get questions. I'd rather focus on the photography. But the Q2, just an amazing camera.
No, maybe not cameras, but Jeremy Brown has a follow-up question, which I think is pertinent here. I get the feeling of looking at Gary Winogrand's work when I'm looking at your documentary work. Thanks for that. That's a big compliment. If you could pick top 3 photographers who have influenced your work, who would they be and why?
Well, let's go through these here. You're not really going to see it in these images that I'm showing you here, which were at the Olympic Games and Australian Open. I would say Jesse Marlowe for sure. I was a big fan of his work before I met him. I was actually working in Camera Lane temporarily in between my marketing job after graduating at RMIT in business marketing, funny enough. And I was, not sure what to do. I wanted to become a photographer. So I worked at Camera Lane for a little bit with Alan Lane. And Jesse walked in and, that's how we met. So Jesse would be one of them. I would say Alex Webb, in terms of his images are literally like a web of layers and of information, and his ability to compose is just phenomenal. Then I would say someone like Jean-Luc Sif, who is probably more of an unknown. He's not unknown. He's a legend. They're the 3 that come to mind, but there's just so many. James Natway, even Matthias Heng, who used to live in Australia, is in Singapore with the Leica Academy. There's just there's so many people, and there's a lot of new photographers that have come out as well that are amazing. So there's just so much to learn in the world of photography, and it just never gets old. Going to this picture here, actually, of George Bush. This was something that I did in Sydney during the APEC convention. And I don't know, it just sort of, I was kind of lucky. I've got very close to eye contact here. And just the expression at the time was quite powerful with what was going on at that time, and how things change. So my career sort of shifted. I started off doing some of that work that you just saw, and I started going into news and sport with Getty Images. And then from there, I started doing a lot of entertainment stuff. Entertainment at that time, which is going back around 10 to 15 years ago, 12 to 15 years ago, was huge. It became like the new news. No one cared so much about the news anymore. They cared about celebrity. And this was before the big social media blow up. So we're talking about real celebrities here, not necessarily social media ones. And at that stage, this isn't a celebrity shot actually at the moment, but this is more of a glamour. But this is a picture that I took for a couple in Thailand. It's not retouched. This is sort of how it was out of camera. But I just wanted to show you the kind of lighting sort of attention to detail here, where, she had some jewelry that was by Bulgari, however you want to pronounce it. And she wanted to highlight that in this shot. And so I said, well, okay, let's do something a little bit different. And I'm using 3 different LED lights here to highlight where I want my focus to be. And, obviously the background not being too dark was also key to it. So I needed a light on the background that was very soft just to balance it out. And as you'll see, actually, in these, like this picture here, there's a diagonal thing going on. I do this a lot with my work. I love diagonal composition. And this is just another one. This was from a workshop I did in Thailand as well, called Sensual Portraiture. I do 3 main workshops. One of them is called Sensual Portraiture. One is called Mastering Low Light, and one is called Cinematic Portraiture. And often I mix the 3 together as well. And yeah, this is another sort of image that I absolutely love as well. So this is one model, and that's her shadow there. And this one was from a workshop that I did in Myanmar, funny enough, not too long ago. And yeah, it was using some beautiful models with LED light. And, you know, a lot of my work, you won't see eye contact that often. To create that cinematic look, it's very, the first instinct by a photographer and that their subject often is to look at camera. And so I do like that, but I save it for rare occasions. So this is one of those more rare occasions where I wanted eye contact from one of the models. It's kind of like blurring backgrounds and bokeh, and I probably will go into that a little bit later. But I'm a little bit against it as a general photography thing. And I find that blurring out backgrounds completely is kind of a novelty, kind of like a fisheye, as well as like the situation looking at camera. And speaking of looking at camera, this is another image I did for Chanel in Thailand. This is with the 90 to 280 I took at Fashion Week with a pro photo flash to the side of a model backstage. She was just getting ready. She just had her makeup done, and I've left it. I haven't retouched the image or anything. I wanted to leave her skin. I mean, the lens is so sharp. It's just brilliantly sharp. If you haven't tried the SL gear, guys, the lenses are just phenomenal. This is an image that's a little bit different. I got this idea to do this picture, and you know, our ideas come from many different sources. This source was Trent Park, who is Australia's magnum photographer. And I remember there was this image he took of an old man. There was a documentary that was done on him 15, 17 years ago. He was in Sydney, and he was at sort of down by the water, I think, and there was this beautiful straight, like sort of stray light coming through the roof. And he waited till this old man had walked into that light, and then he'd exposed for the shadows. And it just blew out almost everything, but the effect was ghostly. And I wanted to try it on this situation, but I needed a model that was wearing sunglasses, dark sunglasses. So, and by doing this, we were able to see the people on the side. Whereas normally, if you expose for the model, you don't get to see any of the people. The background's just completely dark. So it gave me a new perspective on this. And yeah, there's something to be learned from everything. And this is backstage. And that image and this image was with the monochrome, the first M monochrome. Still one of my favorite cameras in history. I just absolutely love that camera. It just, the tonal range and everything is just beautiful. And yeah.
Good question for you, Kristian. Just
Yes.
going back to an earlier question, I was just waiting for a suitable moment, and that picture that you just had may very well fit the category. Do you use zone focusing much when you're using the M camera and the mechanical lenses?
Yeah, I do. When I'm shooting, for example, a shot like this, I probably wouldn't use zone focusing. I would probably just pre-focus and then just try and keep that same distance. It's kind of like zone focusing, because I guess you should always know at a given focal distance and aperture, looking at the dial on an M lens, for example, what my depth of field is going to be, whether it be 1 meter or 2 meters or what have you. But I do use it. I do use it mostly when I'm shooting on the street, where I know that I need to focus on exposure. I'm always thinking about exposure. Over here's shade, over here's sun. I need to constantly be adjusting exposure as I walk, as I go. And when you shoot manual, you need to do that. And people think, oh, that's a lot of work. But the one thing that I don't do is, when the exposure doesn't come out the way I want it to, I don't have to say, well, the camera overexposed or the camera underexposed. Cameras don't underexpose, people do. So it doesn't matter whether you put the control on the camera or not, it's always on me.
Nice one. Thank you.
So this picture was taken in Victoria, a fashion shoot that I was doing, and it's still one of my favorite images. The hill that she's on is very low, actually. It's only about probably 8 feet from the ground, and but coming down on a low angle and zooming in a little bit there sort of put her amongst the clouds, and there was just some beautiful sunlight coming through those clouds, slightly diffused but still somewhat hard and contrasty, and yeah, one of my favorite images. So having worked overseas, I started to travel a lot with getting images with my entertainment and news work, mostly with entertainment. And I went over to Cannes, and you'll see some images in a moment. But I got to Hollywood, and when I got to Hollywood, I'm like, I want to hit the streets. So of course I went to Hollywood Boulevard. And, you know, you've seen these images before of people posing with these Hollywood actors, or I guess you could almost call them, without to be demeaning, struggling actors that are really trying to make it. And, you know, they're not making ends meet. And a lot of them choose to dress up as, you know, a character like the Joker here. And I decided to follow this character, this gentleman, his name's Greg, down Hollywood Boulevard because he wanted to go to his car, put parking in the money in the parking meter. And the afternoon light down Hollywood Boulevard is just beautiful. And he walked past this Japanese sushi house, and it just kind of made sense to capture this image as he was walking. And this leads me to possibly one of my favorite images I've ever taken.
This one.
So the story, I mean, as much as the timing is spot on, and this was taken with an M8 with a 28 Summicron, so sort of closer to a 35mm equivalent or thereabouts, and it was taken with just one shot. But I'd missed the first shot, so I'll get to that in a moment. But what I'll quickly tell you is that the Superman that's there used to come to Hollywood Boulevard as a child, dressed as Superman, just like this kid. And he came to see the original Superman, I forget his name, who used to work across the road at a cafe. And after work, he would dress up as Superman and would come out and basically pose for tips. And so here he is many years later trying to be an actor in Hollywood, but obviously decided, well, you know, may as well do this on the side. I look a little bit like Superman, which he did. And he had real muscles. And the funniest part is that the original Superman was still working there. So the two of them were working side by side. He was a kid once that came to see the original guy. Because this guy has muscles, the original one, who was about probably 30 years older, bought a muscle suit to look bigger and more muscly than this guy. And so here this guy is, and his, you know, he originally bobbed down and shook hands with the kid. And the kid shook his hand, and I went down and pre-focused, and I missed the shot. And basically, as he got up, he just goes high five, and the kid jumped in the air, and I just snapped. I was focused, I was ready, and there you go.
That's a cracking shot, though. I just love the way these.
Yeah, look, the composition isn't amazing. If you look at the the messy background, I'm pretty picky with that, but I love the shot regardless. And so, of course, I went to Cannes, and when I was in Cannes, I was obviously shooting a lot of different events. I was doing portraits with actors, and I just love this image because this is the only time you see the red carpet empty, literally empty. So normally you see two rows of photographers pointing at each other. In the middle, you'll get two rows of actors and actresses walking the red carpet with publicists, and it would be full. And the photographers' jobs are to yell as loud as they can at the talent to get them to make eye contact with their specific camera. And the goal of entertainment photography like that is actually to get a full-length body shot. That's your priority. Eye contact, full-length body. It's about what they're wearing more than who they are, funny enough. And then from there, you go half-length, you go headshot, you look at accessories, all this kind of stuff. So that's what those guys were doing. But when Brad and Angelina walked on the carpet, everyone clears out the way. And I just happened to capture a rare moment where somebody's flash went off and it just illuminated them. So yeah, I love this shot here.
Question
Yes.
before we go on. If you had to pick one actress from the past, actor or actress from the past that you have never photographed, who would you like to spend an afternoon with documenting?
Hands down, I would have said Angelina Jolie, who you're looking at right
Perfect.
now, because this picture here was just a one-off image I did for her personally. She needed an image for her charity. So this sort of ties in with that. And one of my favorite movies is called Beyond Borders. It's with her and Clive Owen. It's sort of a love story set amongst war. It's amazing. And I was telling her how much I loved it. She was lovely. She grabbed my hand with two hands and said that means so much to me, that I like that movie. And it kind of showed in the calmness in her look in the image. But you can't take a bad picture of Angelina Jolie. And she is just absolutely amazing. She was pregnant here with twins, actually, but I wasn't allowed to shoot her stomach for that reason. So it would be her. If I was going to say someone after her, maybe
Someone you haven't
Al
photographed.
Pacino.
Someone you haven't photographed.
Al Pacino, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the presence. You know, I tended to be like most men, love to shoot the beauty of a woman, but Al Pacino is just powerful. So yeah, I would love to have that. So actually, I'll just quickly talk about this image. This image looks really, really simple. But what it was is that I'm by a window. I've got a reflector behind me with the translucent cutting the sun. So that's why you see that little bit of beautiful highlight on her skin there. And the room was quite dark. And as you know, when you're shooting with a window sort of behind you, which is not typically what I'll do, I would normally add more shadow to my subject. She just wanted it nice and bright. So I had a flash with me, and I ended up using the flash bounce into the corner of the room, which ended up bouncing back and just highlighting her hair. So as simple as this looks, all of my images, in fact, most of my images are generally designed to replicate daylight, and they're not always taken in that scenario. But yeah, as simple as it looks, there was a bit of effort that went into this image. Funny enough, after I took that picture of Angelina Jolie and I went back to my editors in Cannes in France, that was at the film festival, I was asked to go to America. And I had to leave the festival early because a man was about to give birth. And this was the world's first official, at least what they claim to be the pregnant man. And this gentleman's name is Thomas Beatty. He was formerly a female beauty pageant from Hawaii and very attractive as a female, and has a partner, a female partner. And they wanted to have a baby. And the female partner had already been married to a man previously and had children and had a hysterectomy. So she couldn't have children. And so Thomas said, I know I'm a man now. I've removed my breasts. I'm taking the hormone tablets, which legally deems me as a male in America, but I still have my reproductive organs. This was all done they were all over the news at the time, and some of you might remember it. They were even on Oprah. And I spent some time with them, documenting them at their home. I flew back to Melbourne, funny enough, and they said, we want you to go back on the next flight. So I'd literally just done this shoot. I flew back and they said, they're going to have their baby and we love what you did with them. We want you to shoot the birth. So I flew back one day later and I was on call. The baby was due any day. The baby came 2 weeks later on the due date, and I was on call 24/7 in a hotel room for 2 weeks straight. It was challenging. And so here's just a couple of images of them. And this is a couple of Aussies. I threw that in just for some. I don't work with a lot of Aussies that often. But yeah, these two guys I met at a party, a Grammy party, funny enough. And they're really tall. I'm not the tallest. I'm 5'6", and they're around 6'2" to 6'4", maybe around 6'4". And at that, at that time, there weren't a lot of tall actors in Hollywood, and Tom Cruise is not exactly tall. So, I'm looking and going, oh, guys, home and away stars. I don't know if they're going to make it. I was just kind of like, I wasn't exactly being optimistic for them, but I'm like, hey guys, good to see you here, and everything. I didn't think too much of it. And little did I know that, about a few months later, there would be Hollywood A-list stars. It's just quite amazing. While this looks like a very simple image, this was taken with a flash using a technique where I have the flash off camera and I literally hold it above my head wherever I want it to go. And the reason why I had it to the left is to give them both even lighting in terms of exposure, because I shoot everything in manual. So if I held it to my left, then one of them would be well lit, the other one would be slightly under. So, and I hold it above my head to give me sort of down shadow. So that's a technique that I would use a lot, especially when I did Hollywood parties and things like that. Bruno Mars with Travie McCoy. This is on the set of Billionaire. If you know that song, I'm not going to sing it, but it's a very famous song about wanting to be a billionaire. This is quite a famous thing. And just very quickly on Lady Gaga here, she's wearing a meat suit. And I've been shooting her all day. I was the official MTV photographer, so I would have full access during the MTV shows and the MTV Music Awards, Movie Awards. I'd be backstage with Cher and all these amazing people. And at the time, I didn't know why he was going to eat her purse. It just didn't click to me that she's wearing meat. Because when I'm in that situation, I've got celebrities everywhere all around me, and I need to get images of all of them during the breaks. And it wasn't until at the end of the day when my editor said, "Oh, great shots with that meat suit and the meat wallet." And I'm like, "Meat what?" And yeah, I looked at the image a little bit more closer, and I'm like, "Holy hell, she's wearing meat." So, this image here, for those people that. This is a lighting technique that I use only on men, where I use two side lights that creates a shadow down the middle of the face. I had the pleasure of shooting Henry Cavill. He was a British actor who played Superman, amongst other things. And he's an amazing person, really, really nice guy. And my dad was in Hollywood at the time visiting me. And so my dad was helping me with the light. I had a light in one hand. My dad had a light in the other hand. And I was shooting the M9 like this. And I had it, this was out of camera using the M9's, I think, sepia mode, using, wait for it, the Hexanon 60mm 1.2 well, for screw mount to M. Great lens, amazing lens. It's worth a ridiculous amount these days. I should have kept it, but beautiful, beautiful lens. And I love this image. This is just here, just for if there's any young people in the audience here tonight. Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez, who were together at that time. This was at the Teen Choice Awards. So right by the red carpet where they all arrive. I was shooting for Teen Choice. So I got to have my own little mini studio set up, and people would come in and I would take their image. So this is sort of where music is going these days. And what I mean by that is the choice of lens. This was taken with a very long lens from way back. But I just love this. I'm a big Justin Timberlake fan. I love pop music. Yeah, this is one of my favorite images. This picture here was actually taken in Thailand before I lived there. And this is, for those that may or may not recognize, that's Han, the character Han, or Sun Kang, as he's known by in the real world. We were doing a photo shoot in the hotel room, basically. And it was a typical thing, lean on the couch, hand under the chin, lots of profile images that I was shooting for Getty Images, that we generally would sell to magazines for profile stories and things like that. And basically, I don't know if he could sense it or not, but he's like, "You look bored." And I'm like, "Oh, crap. I'm not as good an actor as you." I said, "Look, I'm a big fan of your work, but yeah, this, I can feel it from you too. Like, are you as bored as I am?" And he's like, "Yeah, I am." And he said, have you got something else in mind? And I said, I do. And I said, are you up for something interesting? And he said, yeah. So we got out and we got on the street, and I said, you're all dressed up. Let's get you on the streets of Bangkok and let's shoot you as if you're a local Thai. And so he was walking the streets, and we put him in a various amount of different positions. And this particular photograph, I was very lucky. And sometimes timing is everything. Now, if I'm going to be critical, and I can be critical on every image I ever take, but this particular photo, this man who's putting the phone back on the hook, I would have loved for him to be on the phone as well. But literally, what happened with this shot, we were just walking into the scene, and I just got into position, and Sung literally went straight for that center box, picked up the phone, and just pretended to talk to somebody and looked the other way. And as he did, the man put the phone down. I took one frame, and that was it. The guy was gone. And it just wouldn't have balanced if that man was not there. And Sung and I didn't have to talk or anything. We didn't waste any time. It was just one of those images that it just came together. So it's one of my favorite pictures of all time. This guy here, absolutely love him. Zac Efron. We'd met in Australia. He's one of my favorite actors, and we'd worked a couple of times together. This was on a job for MTV for a television promo. And, you know, I often would play on set with lighting. So I would combine the lights that are already there, and I would either change them. And the way I would change them, if I can't move the light, I'll move my subject. So I have a 3-tip rule for changing or manipulating lighting. And that is move the light, move the subject, or move yourself. And any combination of those 3 things allows you to control light, and even to a point where you can really control the mood and tone and atmosphere of your image. So here, all I had to do was just get him to turn his face this way into the shadow. And then I put another light on the back to highlight the edge of his face against that shadow. And I just felt it worked. It worked really, really well. It's one of my favorite images in terms of just a basic headshot. Big fan of R&B and hip hop music, and doesn't get much bigger than Usher. And this is a music video I shot of him on in South Malibu, I think it was, Malibu Beach, up in an abandoned rooftop of a house that was never finished. And that's the ocean in the background. I accentuated a little bit of the vignette, just a little bit, and yeah, it's really high key lighting, but the light was just beautiful. I got to work with Beyonce and shoot one of her entire shows from any position that I wanted on stage. Normally with Beyonce, and for those of you who may remember even the Super Bowl from a few years back, where there were some pretty horrific images that were taken of her and published. Her management are very particular. So they said, we'd probably only approve maybe 3 of her images. And I'm like, from the whole show? They said, normally we only allow people to shoot the first 30 seconds of the first song, or maybe up to 3 songs. You're getting the whole show. So you've got a whole show to get 3 amazing images. They approved about 28, and they asked if I was still working in LA because they wanted to work with me. But unfortunately, at that time, I was moving back to Australia. So yeah, that would have been great to work with Beyonce. And this is one of my favorite images here. My last job in Hollywood, this was maybe around 10 years ago. So this is the late, great Hugh Hefner. And the first reaction that I get from people often is, where are the women? Where are the bunnies? And, you know, as much as beautiful women and photographing beautiful women is always intriguing, it just wasn't something that interested me. And lucky enough, when I went to this job with the Associated Press, they weren't interested in the women either. So I got to spend some one-on-one time with him and the journalists that came with me, just the 3 of us. And we walked around the mansion and got to photograph some pretty personal spaces that Hugh Hefner was in. And this was a picture I took of him at his personal board. And yeah, it was just an incredible time. And this was taken with the M9 with a 50mm 1.4. And now this technique is not, and this is full frame, this isn't cropped. I don't recommend people shoot full frame 50mm headshots. It's not a particular way of shooting that I generally would advise, but for me, I love doing it horizontal like this with the face obviously in the middle. And I find it gives an amazing separation at 1.4. This is the 50mm 1.4 spherical, which is just an amazing lens, highly underrated. Technically an Apo lens, funny enough, but just, yeah, beautiful, beautiful lens. And yeah, one of my favorite images now that he's
Right here.
passed, especially.
There you go. That's the one.
Yeah, that's the lens.
Yep, it's very 50mm.
I don't have it anymore, but yeah,
Got one here.
beautiful, beautiful. I'm looking to borrow, so hook me up. So I was very fortunate. One of my biggest opportunities was working on music videos, and I had probably shot something like 60 odd music videos while I was in Hollywood. And they're long days, long nights. Sometimes you're working all through the night till the morning, 2 days in a row. And at that time, the world's biggest pop star was Katy Perry. And this one here was taken with the M9 with the 50mm Noctilux. And I bought the Noctilux 0.95 at that time. I'd owned previously the F1 probably 3 times. I'm not sure about other people, but the Noctilux for me is always a love, get bored of love sort of situation. And people often do buy it and sell it and buy it again. And at that time, previously when I was a kid growing up, basically between 15 and 25, it was very easy to get Noctiluxes everywhere for, I won't say how much, but a lot less than what they are now, probably about a quarter of the price. And yeah, this was with the 0.95. And the reason why I was shooting that lens was that the M9 obviously is a very great daylight camera, but not particularly wonderful in low light due to its ISO sensitivity rating and being a CCD sensor. And so shooting at 0.95 was something more of a necessity than it was necessarily for creative purpose. And in this image where you don't have a background, this was on the set of E.T. So this is shot also at 0.95, probably at around 640 ISO. That image on the right there is my most famous picture probably of Katy Perry from the same music video. And yeah, just a different scenario. Then the one on the left was also taken one of her music videos called The One That Got Away. And some of you may know of this music video called Last Friday Night, which starred a lot of famous people in this, including the Hansons, which you see in the background, as well as what's his name, the saxophone player, Kenny G. And yeah, here's one picture of Katy that was taken after, the next morning. Shooting on set is not easy. There's a couple of things that you need to do. My main purpose as the kind of photographer that I am was to go on set and create images that they could use for publicity, but not necessarily behind the scenes, but actual poster or billboard or even album cover worthy images. So a lot of these images I would shoot on sets would become the covers of CDs, singles at the time, or albums. And then this is Katy the night before. I probably should have redone the order, but yeah, here she is having a blast the night before and then waking up as nerdy Katy again and wondering what she did. So these days, following there, I've been focusing a lot of my work on commercial photography. It sort of came out of necessity, but it's also a challenge that I've always wanted. As you can see, I've shot documentary, sports, news, entertainment, concerts. And one thing that you might start seeing is a bit of a pattern here of the way I approach lighting and shadow. And I shoot products the same way I shoot people. There's really no difference to it. And the way I love to shoot the most is to recreate daylight. So most of my images that you see that look like daylight are not shot in daylight. I love hard lighting, so I'm kind of the opposite of a lot of photographers that focus on shooting with soft lighting. I absolutely love the challenge of hard lighting, the contrast issues you have to deal with, the challenges of shadows and all that kind of stuff. So I love as I said, hard lighting and recreating daylight. And yeah, this picture was taken actually in the Melbourne Leica store with a couple of those pro photo lights that you have there. So that was when the Q2 had just been released, and yeah, there it is sitting on a book there. I'm not sure if some of the people are familiar, but this watch here is one of the most expensive watches in the world, if not the most expensive time-only watch. So time-only meaning there's not even a date complication to it. It's by a company called Greubel Forsey, which, if you know Patek Philippe, they're going to be way above them in terms of, not necessarily in terms of being a better watch, just in terms of the quality that goes into it and the kind of R&D. It's quite amazing. And that's sitting on top of the 120 millimeter macro lens for the S line, which is just phenomenal lens. And I've used it on the SL as well, which is just, yeah, incredible. So you can see I love shooting watches, and you know, they all have their own character. And for me, it's the same thing. It's a portrait. And the way I approach it is I look at the watch and I look at what details I need to see in the image, and where I need light, where I need shadow. And probably the shadows are a little bit too dark in this picture. If I'm going to say anything about it, I'd probably like to re-edit it actually. But it's, you know, finding the right background and then the right light. And one thing you'll often see with my work is that the light is usually on the opposite side of the scene. So if you look at movies, for example, even TV shows like Game of Thrones, which is probably a really good example, there is the camera and then the light will be on the opposite side. So I'm always shooting from what I call the shadow side. And that enables the images to look a lot more natural, and allows the light to stand out because it's coming towards you. It's not coming from the same direction or angle that you're shooting from. And some of you may have seen, Leica uses a lot of my product images that I take. I take some officially for Leica, and then some of them I take just in my spare time. This was an image that I took I was quite bored. I was sitting at work actually in Thailand, in Bangkok, at the Leica store. And I'm like, you know what? We got some beautiful gear sitting there. I want to take some pictures. So yeah, I just sort of recreated this this scene here sitting on top of a book. I love shooting Leica cameras on their back with the lens coming up, often so I can see the glass of the lens. And then, yeah, and then I put this other 50mm Apo next to it, and there you go. So this brings me to my last little set of images. And, you know, as before, Nick mentioned my mastering low light workshop, which I started doing quite a number of years ago. And you know, with photography, a lot of things are copied, and look, copying is a form of flattery, and copying's been done throughout the sands of time. The only difference is that right now the access to information is so abundant and easily accessible that there are so many people copying the same thing. So it's very hard to be original, or even if you are the original creator of something, to work out if it's even you. But I'm pretty confident that I created this workshop called Mastering Low Light. And I'm not the first person to shoot in low light, that's for sure. But what I do at these workshops is I recreate scenes that are somewhat cinematic. I first started off doing it where I'd walk out on the streets of say, Bangkok, and I'd take a model. And what I would generally look for is not actually a model, but an actress. And to me, I prefer my models or actresses or my subjects to act in front of the camera rather than model. And the way I do this is by the way that I direct them. And you know, the first thing generally is to look away from camera, unless I want a specific portrait. But what I do is obviously I tell them something to think about. I create a scene for them, and then I get them to act out that scene. And I will always, and this is the thing where people sometimes like, oh, you're always using lighting. It's like, not necessarily. My whole approach to lighting is this: it's problem solving before creativity. So I might go somewhere and I've got a truck full of gear, which I generally don't. But if I did, the first thing I would ask myself is, what is the natural light or the ambient light giving me? And based on that, I will look at it and I will try and get away with a natural light image or an ambient light image without adding or subtracting light. But adding and subtracting light to me is a way of actually just getting over problems associated with lighting in terms of contrast ratios between the exposure and the background, the exposure on your subject, things like that. And this is more of a cinematic portrait that I recreated with these two models here. These weren't actors; these were actually models. And actually, the man, I'd shot a commercial for a beer in China originally, so I liked him and decided to do this workshop with him. And so, yeah, I basically got a very powerful LED light outside, and I've got sort of a plant, and I put the plant sort of in front of the window in the direction of the light, and that's created sort of a bit of a shadow on the left side of the wall, and it's sort of cut off and it's coming through, and it's lighting that. It's on an angle where I'm getting a little bit of rim light on the left side, on the right of my male model there, which highlights his body against the darker mirror. And then it's also doing a third thing, which is lighting the fan on the right side. So, and then I've got a reflector on the right, just kicking a little bit of light coming back in. So I'm really doing what I can to recreate natural looking environments. And that's what mastering low light is about. It is about focusing on the ambient first, but in situations where we have horrible ambient light, but we really want to shoot because we have a great background, for example. And the challenge is trying to find a way to make that image work. And we're going to need to supplement light in the foreground sometimes to make that happen. And yeah, this is another one here where I'm using an LED light, but I'm blending it with the background. So whenever I do add a light, and I'll go into this more with the workshop for those of you who may want to join, is that what I'll do is I'll get my ambient exposure first. I won't even pick up my light. I'll get my ambient exposure first. I'll see what it's giving me. And then I'll just add light if I want to, just to highlight a certain part of an image that may need highlighting. If I can't move the subject into an area of light that looks complementary, I'll find a way to add it. And generally what I'll do is I'll add it in a position where the light looks most natural. And this is one of those situations. Here's more of a cinematic scene that I created. This is with the 75mm Noctilux, funny enough. And yeah, just a very messy background, but with a little bit of light, and it looks dingy, and she's trying to look scared. I don't like this image, and let me pick on it for a little bit for the sake of criticism. Her hand is too flat. Her fingers need to be a little bit bent. They need to be soft. And her eyes are a little bit too kind of just, they're not so focused. They don't have that. She was meant to be scared, cuddling into the man who's protecting her. But generally what these images that I take at these workshops are, I'm setting up the first image. So I'm creating it. I'm putting light where I need to, if I do need to use light. And then I'm taking a couple of shots and I'm demonstrating it. And then what happens is, excuse me, my subjects, or my students will then come in and start shooting, and I'm directing them as well as directing the models to create a better looking image than probably the one that I did as a test shot. So just to give you an example there, I was looking at this picture and I go, oh, I could have been good, but I didn't quite get the shot, but I'm pretty sure one of my students did.
You're very hard on yourself, Kristian. It's a pretty good picture.
It's good to be hard on yourself. The day I've told myself the day that I feel that I've got nothing more to learn, I may as well just give up, because this is how I've got to a point where I can shoot so many different things. It's not just because I want to. I just feel like I've got so much to learn from a different genre of photography, and if I can find a way to implement some of those ideas and those concepts into a different genre, it might be rewarding. And I think for me, I wouldn't call myself an artist, so to speak. I wouldn't say I'm even that artistic. I'm quite technical. And what I do is, and what I help my students do, is master that technical gap, which is, here you are here. This is where you want to be. There's a bridge. And there are obstacles along that bridge that you need to get over. And you might have a great idea in your head, but if you don't understand how to master lighting or mastering, for example, low light, like in this situation here, then it's going to be, a real challenge going forward to get what you want to do. There is an element of creativity that comes from problem solving. And so that's what I typically do at my workshops. This is another one in a really dingy toilet. And funny enough, if you look at it, it's quite eye-catching. The light isn't so natural here. It wasn't designed to be so natural. I kind of wanted her to pop a little bit. I actually asked her to put her foot on the urinal, like sort of against it, but she sort of put it right in there. So that's how that image came. There was a bit of a communication barrier between myself and this Thai model here. And this is in Thailand at a club that literally looks like you're in Cuba. Quite an interesting club there. And so, yeah, that's it for my presentation, guys. And yeah, I guess I'll leave the floor open to you for any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kristian. There's some really good insights there. I'm hoping everybody who's been listening, and there's quite a few of you actually, there's some quite subtle insights there actually, which I really appreciate. Thank you very much for that.
No
have you, there's a couple of questions that we haven't got to yet, and I can see a couple more coming in as we go. So let's just take a few more questions before we wrap things up. Yep. Just going back to the beginning and peering at my screen here. Oh, here we go. Andrew Yeo would like to know, have you found the experience of picture taking to have changed as a benefit or a challenge with the move from film to digital?
I would say that was something that I got over a long time ago, and I adopted digital very quickly. And I really haven't I've shot film once or twice in the last, when did I stop shooting digital? When I was about 22, around 20 years ago. And then I did a couple of jobs in film that was requested by clients. But I love the aesthetic of film, but I find at the moment I don't really have it doesn't fit into my workflow right now, for example. I'll get to the actual answer to the question, I guess. So I don't use it at the moment, but I'm always attracted to it. I love looking at people's work when they're shooting film. But for me, it's not the transition to digital that's the issue. And look, it's not necessarily an issue, but I find in terms of traditional photography as we know it, it's no longer what it used to be. And it's because of social media, not because of digital. It is linked, it is related, obviously. But I find that social media, and I guess probably the best way to describe it is, previously, most images in the world, more images now are being taken probably per second than what they were taken per month, going back 10 years ago.
True.
But remember before, most images were taken outward. Now, most images are taken
I'm going to have to interrupt you slightly. Do you want to just stop your share, because we've got a weird sort of multiple screen going on?
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Just go stop share, and then it'll just be back to the two of us on the screen.
How do I stop share?
There we go. That's the way. Well
okay. Okay. Great. Sorry about that.
That's perfectly all right.
Yeah. So, yeah, for me, I find, it's just that transition. And I find that the value of photography has been diminished severely. I'm not trying to be too negative about it. There's a lot of positive things that have come from digital and social media, the ability to connect and in ways we'd never done before. And it's just the evolution of photography. But photography in the traditional sense, if you ask my opinion, it's very little of it left. The boundaries of even editorial integrity, not setting up images. I see a lot of street photography now that I know has been set up. It's kind of like it pushes the barriers of honesty in photography. And that's probably the only area where I find I really draw the line is just honesty in photography.
Okay, that's a pretty profound answer. All right, okay. You said that you like technical stuff, so here's a technical question for you.
Okay.
Vincent Ip would like to know, hi, do you use grey cards to master the color of your image to get the most accurate representation?
No, not anymore. I did, and in some situations I will. Um, I'll at least, if I'm shooting in a scenario where I'm shooting in constant light, in the same light most of the time, I'll have a gray or a white piece of paper in one of the shots. Something that I can get a baseline reference on for white balancing. In terms of doing custom white balance, I do really recommend it for people that are wanting to understand how to get correct color. I actually do all my color correcting as a final. I do it on a BenQ graphics screen, but I also then reference it to my MacBook, because most of my work now goes to social media for my clients, or at least online. So one of the most common devices all worldwide, and Apple tends to have a profile that is very consistent between all of its devices. So I typically reference it off a MacBook Pro. So, but I would say that color is one of those differentiating factors that really shows between a photographer who really knows what they're doing and one that doesn't necessarily. I'm not saying I get color right all the time, but I'm pretty confident in understanding what white balance is. I understand sometimes you cannot white balance if you have mixed lighting. Sometimes you don't want to white balance, and sometimes you want an image that's a bit warmer, or you want it to be a bit colder. White balancing is a technique that works, and it should be used most of the time, but it is also something that you can play around with creatively as well. But I'd say, to answer it really quickly, start off doing it with a gray card, using a gray card as a means of understanding the workflow and how it impacts on the editing side, because I'm always thinking about what I'm going to be doing in editing, even though I shoot to get my images 100% right in camera, which doesn't always work out that way, but that's my goal. And just to be more sure of myself, I am always thinking about, well, if I can't do this lighting wise, I might be able to add a gradient or do something in post. So I hope that answers your question.
That's actually a good answer. It also leads to some other answers, also the questions, I should say, which I've just had a couple of ideas for future seminars. So thank you for that. Because
good.
There's some issues there that could be addressed, definitely. So thanks for that one. All right, that was Vincent. Bettina Cutler would like to know if you've ever considered shooting stuff in what one might call the fine art genre, which is a slippery genre to define. But maybe you can answering that.
Yeah, many times. To be honest, I could replicate it very easily by looking at something and just doing it. That's my specialty. Being able to look at an image and go, I know how to do that. Except for maybe like super specialized macro scientific stuff, even some landscape stuff that you do, Nick, like some of that's above my pay grade level of experience. So, but fine art many times. A lot of the work that I do with models, even, I would love to do more nude type stuff, I guess you could say, in the fine art genre. But it's something out of respect for my partner that generally I won't look into doing that. But I think it's something that I look at a lot. But when I have delved into that area in the past, I honestly, to be honest, haven't done it at the level that I'm happy with. So I've never really displayed it too much, and I haven't attempted it too much either. I kind of save that for the artists, the real artists that are out there. And I get a lot of them come to me as students as well that want help technically, and I'm really happy to help them with that. But it's something that fine art can't really, you can learn it to an extent, but it's so much of it is natural. I have such an admiration for those that can shoot fine art so beautifully, because it's something that maybe it's a challenge and something that I'll probably look at maybe down the track, to be honest with you. Okay. That's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it is a good one. Mirek Razkowski.
Eric.
Yeah, Mirek.
Is that the one I know?
I always
maybe, probably.
Sorry about that. Kristian, do you do portrait commissions?
Absolutely. If we're talking about general, like, personal stuff, like, shoot family portraiture and things like that, I generally do that for friends. It's not something that I advertise. And I'll tell you, probably, if I'm going to be honest, one of the biggest hurdles that's been in my career, it's overcoming the celebrity factor. As much as people can look at my portfolio and go, wow, you shot a lot of celebrities, you know, back then you had to be really good to get into those positions of and opportunities. Now it's not so much like that. And I think people can kind of look at it and go, well, the image just looks good because it's a celebrity. And there is some truth to that, to be honest. So it is much harder to make an average person look amazing, to be fair. But to answer the question simply, yeah, I do.
Okay, fair enough. And I think last question, which is from Frank Ciccioni. I'm not doing very well with the names. I hope that's right. What social media platforms have been most successful for you? And P.S. Great presentation.
Thank you very much. That's a really good question. I would say Facebook, to be honest. I find the photographic community there's a lot of engagement occurring on Facebook. To give you an example, I started Leica Classifieds. I don't know if it's probably the biggest online Leica selling platform. I'm not sure how it competes with the official Leica forum, but it's the biggest one on Facebook, for example. And so I started that, and I still moderate it a little bit, but that was really successful. But for me personally, as a photographer, I've connected with so many Leica photographers through Facebook. Instagram is just a totally different platform in terms of, it's probably one of the best for imagery. There's been other ones that have come out. There was another program that came out that failed. It was based on stories, putting a collaborative story together of images, which was a great idea. It just didn't take off. Instagram, I like being on a lot in terms of just looking at imagery. And because you don't have to deal with, you know, politics and all these things that people talk about, including myself at times when I want to rant. But I think that a lot of that's filtered out on Instagram, whereas on Facebook, you have to filter through it yourself. But, you know, it depends on who you're friends with and what groups you're part of. But I think that there's a lot of great people to connect with, especially Leica people on Facebook. And it's something that, you know, you can you feel you can trust a little bit more of it on there. And in terms of getting more in-depth conversation about imagery, Facebook is definitely the platform for that.
Fair enough. All right, that's the last of the questions. So one thing that we must mention is that last section of images that you showed, and you were talking about some quite intriguing concepts to do with low light photography. Kristian will in fact be he has converted his hands-on workshop, which he's done, into an online version of that, which we will be offering on 19th of August, I think. Pretty sure that's right. That is live on our website as of now for bookings. That will be for a much smaller group and will be not quite the same webinar format. It'll be more like a meeting format, so you get to, you know, to participate a bit more with, you know, real-time questions and so on. And I'll be there to moderate it, and Kristian will be presenting his ideas. So if that's of interest to you, it's on the Leica Academy Australia website as of about 4 o'clock this afternoon. So it's hot off the press, hasn't been announced yet officially, so you're getting first dibs on it. So I expect you to fill up in about the next 10 minutes.
That would be great, look, guys.
Kristian, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. That was really interesting. And I've had quite a lot of comments coming through the chat saying, you know, thank you so much, really interesting, great stuff, really well presented. So I'll give you...
Very welcome.
Thanks on behalf of everybody watching, and thanks on behalf of Leica Australia. And we will be talking very soon about your workshop, and hopefully some of the people watching will be there to have a conversation with us then. So what I'm going to do is share our little screen with the Leica Academy website on it, and we can wave goodbye. Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Okay, bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.